You know that when we talk about the internet and when we connect to the internet and the values that it brings us as users, but today, in many places in the world, the internet is considered a catalyst for economic growth. An international study shows that the internet creates 2.6 jobs for every job lost because of technological efficiency. And if we could look at the internet as a national economy, the internet would be the fifth largest economy in the world after US, China, Japan, and India, and before Germany. And Israel, as we've heard, the startup nation, we're really leaders in this trend. In 2010, and the McKinsey report talks about the fact that 6.4% of the GDP in Israel has its source in the internet, more than any other country in the world, and that the rate of the growth of this economy is twice as fast as that of the regular economy. So, Amir, maybe we'll start with you. Startup Nation, is it a fiction? Is it branding or is it real? And if it is it only in the high-tech world or is it in the business sector and the governmental sector too? Startup Nation is a code name for innovation. And the question whether there is innovation in Israel, the answer is yes. There's a lot of innovation in Israel. It's a large sector that is clearly at the forefront of the global technology. But the question should be more complex. The question should ask, okay, so you're a startup nation. What is the role of the startup nation? What is the public role of the startup nation? Is it indeed only to create amazing companies like Waze and have these fantastic exits of billions of dollars? Or does it have a social role of this ecosystem called high tech? So if we look at this ecosystem and try to analyze its social impact, and we ask, let's see, what is its social role? Its social role, in essence, is to improve the standard of living of everyone, to create more product, to increase productivity, to make us live better lives. And now the question is, does high tech indeed do that? So yes, it does it, but it does it only to a relatively small group of people. If we look over the years, we can see a very sharp rise in about the year 2000 in the number of people who participate in this internet economy, this high-tech economy that we're talking about. But from the year 2000 to the present, we've been more or less on the same level. In other words, the number of employees working in high-tech has remained more or less stable. It's about 9.5%. So we have a group, not a small group, which is very, very innovative, and it's active in the most innovative development centers in the world of Google and Apple and Microsoft and Intel, which are all here, and they earn a good salary. The average salary there is 25,000 shekels, and that puts them directly in the 9th decile, if not the 10th. The fact that they jump immediately to the 9th decile, that means that there are 8 deciles that are not benefiting from that economy. And whose role is it to bring it to the economy as a whole? Look, clearly, it's clear that it is the role of the state to do that. The innovation is here already. So where is the government in that? Is it working on it? Is it on the agenda of the government? We have to understand that this can be divided into 2 levels. Once the government contributed to the building of the startup nation, the whole matter of the chief scientist in the early 90s has led to the positioning of Israel, placing it at the forefront of technology. And that's outwardly and towards and then there's the second level, and that's what the government does in order to radiate it back. If you want them, the government has contributed to many technologies, and as has been said, it doesn't always use those technologies. I can say, for example, in the Ministry of the Economy, in the framework of the the possibilities that we have. We're active in the social media and Facebook and various sites that are related to various units of the ministry. We have an online consultation arena. We have built the work plans of the ministry and all the other ministries, copied what we did, our digital program and so on, which is very advanced. And we have mobile applications for various units for whom it is suited, whether they are young people working with young people or as the agency for small businesses. But we still have many difficulties, and that is a result of the governmental approach and the tools that the government provides. I feel, for example, that when I surf in the office, I surf much slower than I do at home. So I go to the IT people and they say it's not us, it's a central issue. So how fast is it? They don't know. And so that's one thing. And two, we want to examine various possibilities of using more advanced technologies. No, you can't. There are rules. They go for the familiar with that which has the most experience with, and so on. So the government has a great difficulty leading processes that will use the things that it itself advanced the development of. I can give you more examples. Every evening, for example, from about 8 o'clock in the evening after I finish all my meetings, I spend about 2 hours going through paperwork, signing papers, signing contracts and to release money and so on. Well, that's so old already. I've worked in a private company. Everything comes already online. Double click. Very, very user friendly. You know what you're signing, and it's very simple. All these things need to be changed. If that change doesn't come, then first of all, it will be very difficult to radiate the change outward, because at the moment that the government becomes a customer and has adopted the technology that it supports, it radiates outward, and it gives it offers a great deal of support to those companies that you help develop. You become their beta site, and it helps your export. It helps the productivity of the government. These are processes that the government must undergo, and I hope they will. We're fighting for it. Let's see, what does the government need to do to experience these changes? We heard the example of the minister from Singapore who came up with a comprehensive strategic plan for the whole government, crossing all ministers, and it increased the productivity and the GDP per capita of about 4% as opposed to the 2% that we're at. I know that it's Yossi, in the Innovate Israel study that Doron talked about, it also talked about an overall plan, but recommendations are easy. What is needed to implement it? You have to want to. I would like to mention the simple words of the Cheshire cat who asked Alice if she knows when Alice asked her what way to take, and he said, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which path you take. I think the current Israeli government has already placed this subject of putting Israel in the place where it knows where it wants to go on the map. There's something called FTTH. It is an initiative of the R&D, and it is being led by the Minister of Communications, which will enable Israel to be in a completely different place. It is seemingly a technological project, but it's not just technological. It's a social project. It's a project that the government understands the need to close the geographical distance and to increase the GDP, and the Prime Minister is putting a great deal of pressure on. Cisco is involved in the project, and other multinationals, and we are putting a lot of pressure on them to shorten the deployment time of this infrastructure, and together with all the companies and all the sectors, we will try to develop one single coherent national program that will involve education, health, and welfare, and other areas as well. And this is very important. Let me ask you a difficult question. The optic fiber initiative is very important. It deals with infrastructures. The national plans that we've seen, these are, we went through one ministry other, and we saw how each ministry adopts ICT technologies, and it crosses through all the ministries. Does this government indeed plan to do something about it? Yes, there is a great deal. There is a written plan that's waiting for the government's authorizations, being led by the PMO, and it will have components from non-governmental sectors as well. And this program is based on that fiber optic infrastructure, but it takes applications and the introduction of cloud technology into account, and also other aspects of infrastructure applications and facilities and crowdsourcing and things of that nature. We have a technical problem. I can't hear properly. We're talking about technology. We're not a high-tech company. If we were a high-tech company, then we would be building a product to sell, and that would be that. The technology would be the essence. In government, the technology is not the essence. We don't do technology for technology. We use technology in order to improve the services that the government gives to the public, to businesses, and so on, in order to cut down the bureaucracy, in order to close the gap that has been created between the public and the capabilities of the government. When we look today and we see all kinds of statistics of Facebook users and Google and so on, the Israeli public has digital accessibility. It's not something alien to them. It's not that we have to teach the public what the internet is, what mobile is, and how to use it. On the contrary, the public expects us, the government, to provide the tools. The government needs to come and look at the citizen. We had discussions on G2C, and that's, of course, government to citizen. But I would be happy if it would be government to customer, the one who has the right to choose. And there has to be many elements where there is a right to choose services from the government or from somewhere else. The rules of the game are changing, and if the government doesn't realize that the game is changing and the rules are changing, you have to start to think differently. In other words, all the services that we are providing, for example, digital first, we are providing channels in a conversation to those who aren't able to get it on a digital level, but we provide every service on a digital level too, and we give it in a uniform fashion to everyone. And the moment that there is a real commitment on the part of the ministries that they are doing it, then all the problems that Amit mentioned of yes, no, they will have to be resolved. They will have to provide the mechanisms, because that will be the commitment of the government to give the services in a uniform fashion. We're talking a lot about open government. It's not just a slogan. It's not just some nice words about openness and transparency. We're seeing technology create something different. The rate of change forces us to respond differently. We're saying we can't just say what we want once every 4 years. We have to raise subjects that cross through parties as well. Yes, we vote for a certain party or a certain agenda, but sometimes there are subjects that cross through all the parties. We want people to listen to us. I think the most amazing example that surprised me with its intensity is the Trachtenberg report. When in wake of the Trachtenberg report, there was a sharing site, and we saw the response. I was very skeptical about it. There were more than 3,600 responses that were articles, not just, short responses. There was people really wanted to contribute. The government has to develop these tools to be able to listen, to respond, and use them on an ongoing basis. The databases, the deputy minister talked about it. We have to understand that this information doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the public, and we have to make it accessible to the public. We know that all the decisions and applications and so on, we have to understand there are many, many entities, including business entities. Yes, I want to encourage the businesses to make their data available as well. The more money, this insight doesn't yet exist in the government ministries. We have to make it accessible. It doesn't exist even among the different ministries themselves. We have to make a decision. Yes, digital first. We're talking about all the channels. Countries like Portugal, Canada, they've gone much further, and they make a point of contact, one-stop shop for the government. There's no reason at all. Think about how much these things cost and the added value that every ministry should have some kind of service office that is open at certain hours, and nobody knows when they are. But when there are processes and businesses that, of course, in the local government too, and talked about there's a lot of talk about the gaps between the local and national governments, and so someone shouldn't have to go first to this office and then to that office, but to have everything under one roof. And the technology enables all the public representatives who have reception hours to meet with the public. That they will have responsibility for the data, but the platform, the perspective has to be uniform. You're talking about the matter of awareness, the matter of openness, of databases. Let's talk about 3 or 4 areas that come to mind in which the government has a very important role and can, via these 4 areas. One is the regulator, who determines the rules of the game, how it's possible to determine the rules of the game in such a way so that it will encourage innovation and technology for the benefit of all the citizens of the State of Israel, and not just only part. But Amit, for example, in the form of the regulator, if you were the regulator, if you had to deal with a single subject, if you were to focus on a single subject in order to create a healthy market environment for the benefit of the citizens of the state, what would you focus on? There isn't just one thing. Like everything today, economy is too complex for a single silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. I want to connect to what everything Carmela said. I think we have to add another layer as well. Is to change the approach, to change the principles. To lead to a situation so that it is used in hospitals, because we are in a place where the people who provide the best price are the winners. Before I can talk about resources that need to be allocated for a bigger budget for the chief scientist or for other areas, before the budget, let's change the approach. Let's change the approach in the government and say, yes, we as a government, we have to take risks. Let's change the rules and introduce new technologies, even if there is a certain risk. We have to buy something anyway, so let this government be the platform for the development of those technologies that we're so proud of around the world. I think it's almost an embarrassment when we're asked as the government. Sometimes I go abroad and we try to advance import, and they ask us, does it work for you? So we try to circumvent it very intelligently, but sometimes the best technologies, we don't use them here. The Deputy Minister spoke earlier about adopting, say, ways in such a way in the police. I don't want to mention names of companies, but there are many companies that are leaders in the world and sell hundreds of millions of dollars, and they provide optimization for various customer services, and they're not used by the government. And the government usually provides services in many different forms, and it doesn't, because it's too innovative and they don't know how to use them. That's the change. That's the change that needs to be made. The government is also a big consumer of services, and when we look at who it consumes it from, these are tenders that are aimed at the large companies. Why shouldn't these bids be aimed at the smaller companies too? I think why shouldn't the government be a better site for startups? It must be. It should be. Why has it happened? I've participated in many discussions of this type in the past decade, and during that period, everyone understands, everyone sees what is happening right in front of their eyes. Everybody has smartphones and tablets and so on. Everybody's connected. Technology's amazing. And they see the problems, and they also see the solutions. In other words, they form a committee, and the committee comes up with excellent. And all these solutions go right into a drawer somewhere in the budget department, and they don't leave it unless there is a very big crisis. And there isn't today that same sense of urgency that will cause someone to pull out those contingency plans that are there in the drawer. It's all there. It's all ready to take them out of the drawer and implement them. There are no politicians. There's no one who's willing to take the short-term risk. It's a short-term risk. In other words, he takes the risk, and the results will only be seen a few years down the line.
I'm very familiar with the work. It has nothing to do with making contracts. What is permitted is not permitted, is not decided by the budget department. That's exactly the budget department's limitation. Whether the Ministry of Justice or the Legal Council, they have different responsibilities. It's not the ministry's responsibility. It's really not the budget department's responsibility. Even if you have the budget, no, it has nothing to do with budget. The government system today maintains its own stability, its own capabilities. Change has to be dramatic. We can't just do things in order to change the tender laws. The government is a consumer as well as a provider. If we were more liberal with these tenders, that would be good, but we also have to change our inner policies into the government, the new platforms. Right now, we have an outdated, archaic law for issuing tenders. Let's go once again to applications, that application for certain providers, certain approved providers. Every organization can conduct its own pricing and contract with us. What we need is, first of all, awareness and understanding the fact that the rules of the game have changed and the rules of today are outdated. Why don't we adopt new rules? Some countries are doing that, in fact. The government is also a very big employer. As a manager at Google, I can really appreciate the organizational culture at the company that promotes innovation. It's a slogan, but it also has a cost. When we focus on innovation, it means that people have to take risks, think outside the box, and there are many failures. People don't like to talk about that side of innovation. Innovation means you take risks. Risks means failures. Can the government allow itself that luxury of adopting that culture of innovation? Much less than the private sector. You have 3 people on this panel that spend time in the private sector. We weren't always in the public sector. And if you can't handle failure, you won't be too good at success. Because if you're conservative, you won't do anything new that hasn't been done before. I'm not a politician, so I can't answer questions about politicians. R&D in the government has some successes. So in the public sector, we do have innovation, mainly in the military and the Ministry of Defense. The government's role is to take risks where there's a market failure and take the risk upon itself. I'm not saying they have to be extreme with big projects and fail on a big scale, but it can do it in a judicious way. Today, they're bending over backwards in the other direction. It's a hot topic talking about productivity. We have trouble with productivity. Every single night, I think that I could save myself 2 hours of work if I could just double click my documents, my electronic signature on the internet. It's like in the 60s. I take 2 hours work of paperwork home to sign every single night. Where's the risk here? These things exist. It's absurd that I should have to do that. These things exist in many places. It's not even a question of taking risks. The government should be able to do that electronic signature. We need a national strategic plan. I see that the audience here is trying to participate, so bear with us for 2 more minutes. We don't have a broad perspective that cuts across all the ministries for regulation, for issuing tenders, for privacy protection. The rules are very important and I respect them, but we have to break out of conventional wisdom. The technology is there. We need to be resolute and have staying power. The government is a heavy organization. It can't spearhead innovation. We have to have people to help push us to take these steps. We need the staying power to introduce systemic change. I don't want to blame the government for everything. I want to take some of the blame or place some of the blame in the private sector. All these successful programs, national strategic programs, ultimately included a government as well as a third sector component and a private sector component, along with the university's contribution. What is our job in the private sector? What is our role here? My view is that the private sector does not have to engage in this. I think that you're doing very well. Our job is to encourage you with the right tools, the right means. Sometimes it's budget, not always. Sometimes it's regulation, but not always. We have to enable you to develop. You don't have a role in this context other than counting on us to give you the supportive environment you need to develop properly. On a small scale, when I'm talking about Google, we cooperate so that we can work with you. That's a defining case. It's good that you're doing it, and we learn a lot from that, but it doesn't have to follow that model. That's my own view. I disagree, at least as far as technology is concerned. When I was in the private sector, I was in the private sector, and then I joined the public sector. And now I'm working in the government sector. Government has a critical role to play here in technological innovation. The private sector has to know where the government is doing so as to develop tools for us to adopt. On the other hand, if we want to understand where technology is going, what the applications are, we can learn from you. You set the benchmark. The private companies as well as the global companies working with other governments. Some companies work vertically with the public sector. So we're talking about the cross-sector cooperation. And we need the tools that are developed by the private sector. The government, as well as the banking system, has legacy systems that are very old-fashioned in COBOL with mainframe and storage, huge computer mainframes. and security. We haven't even talked about privacy policy. We don't know how to write tenders. We wanted to issue a tender, we didn't even know how to write it in technology. So without trying to downplay the law, we need this dialogue so that we can learn from you and use your tools. Dialogue and tools. I agree with what Carmela says, and I think you can also contribute in your R&D centers, such as you have at Google and other companies. I think that charging the companies with this task is to remove responsibility from the government. The companies always want the bottom line. That's what they care about. They open new offices at Google and introduce new applications and new startups, but it's a small investment. In the private sector, there are different kinds of companies. There are mega companies with access to financing. They can invest in IT on a huge scale. There are small and medium-sized businesses, a large sector. It's much harder for them to obtain funding, and they don't have the knowledge. And that's where the government, perhaps that's where the government should step in and help. The global companies don't need help. They have a low interest rate. They make their investments. But the smaller companies and the medium-sized companies, there's a sort of digital black hole that's lagging behind the cutting edge of technology. That's where the government has to step in. I would like to introduce another aspect to the discussion. We need a cultural change. Nobody spoke about the cultural change in the government sector, the private sector, and in the public at large. One of my dreams is a paperless tax authority. A paperless tax authority will use technology, will use applications to compare depreciation, and will be able to handle everything and discover tax evasion without any paperwork. I said culture. We can't hear the comment. In today's reality, companies are citizens. They're not just profit makers. They're citizens. They contribute to society and the environment. And you have to make the information more accessible to the public. You have to increase transparency and control over the government. We have comments, but no questions. Questions. I'd like a real question with a question mark at the end. I'll try to change my comment into a question. I'll put a question mark at the end. We're missing out on a very important thing that the government has to do, and that's to remove regulatory barriers. Health is my area of expertise. Look at the Ministry of Health's guidelines for digital activity. It's issued guidelines, but the guidelines do not enable any digital activity. So what can you do to enable new guidelines, remove regulatory barriers so that the guidelines can be short and sweet and say, try this, and we might fail? The government structure, we're talking about the government as one organization, but there is no centralized unit. There's nobody that will implement standards in the different ministries of government. We have to build all that. We have to build a unit that will set the standards and assess the different government ministries We have to connect and combine. Today, the government structurally work independently. That's a fault of the government structure today. That's true of other sectors as well. Regulation has to be re-examined in general. One last comment. I said to myself, I really shouldn't open my mouth, but I do have two comments to make. I support everything that's been said here. I have one emotional comment and one philosophical one. I visited someone at an old age home. He told me his son used to come visit, but he stopped. It's harder and harder. He was supposed to pay once a month. He says now it goes by computer. He doesn't even come to visit me now. He pays online. He hasn't seen his son for a whole year, and he had tears in his eyes. The second example is a doctor with a patient taking regular medication. He used to have to come to the doctor. The doctor would talk to him a little bit as he wrote out the prescription, would adjust the medication, but it's all done by computer today. There's no direct contact between the physician and the patient. Another example, the Ministry of Social Affairs, there are criteria. Everything is done with the greatest expedience. In the past, people would talk, people would sit and maybe weep a little bit. There was the human touch. Nothing is left of that today. Let's say I want to tell my friends on the committee what our agenda is. I used to have to call them up, talk a little bit on the phone. It took a while, but I would listen to people, get some feedback. There was that human touch. Today, you click, you send it off. There's no contact anymore. So what I'm trying to say, let's not lose the human touch, the heart. It would be terrible if we were all automatons. We all agree, but it gets lost. That was the emotional remark. Now just one philosophical remark. We'll wait. The philosophical remark is, for the long term, we've made so much progress. All the progress is good. For the future, let's think where this is all leading. We'll be sitting here in 20 or 30 years and thinking, how do we go back in time? We've lost control. If you know anything about science fiction, you know that it's coming true so fast and it's frightening. So let's be human. I'd like to thank all our panelists, Amit, Carmela, Yossi, and Amir. Thank you all very much.